Samir Tana, our Assistant Director of Policy here at Illinois Action for Children. So what we want to do is kind of tell you the story of what we've all lived through for the last couple of months, and kind of bring you up to date on where we stand as a state in terms of the budget, in terms of specifically childcare and other early learning programs that we all care about and advocate for. And then we're going to kind of break it up because unfortunately this session we've had to deal with 2 fiscal years, and so we want to just recap because I feel like it's kind of confusing and it feels like we've done this before, and then we realized, oh, now we're working on next year's budget. So we're going to recap really briefly the FY15 childcare crisis that we experienced back in the winter. And then we're going to pause after that and take some questions if you have any. And then Samir will pick up the reins and kind of walk us through the session where we really did start to focus on the FY16 budget. Again, our fiscal years in Illinois run July 1st through June 30th, so we will be wrapping up FY15 on June 30th and starting the FY16 fiscal year on July 1st, the fiscal year for which we do not yet have a budget, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, so I'm just going to get started. So, of course, as many of you know and are well versed in, our state has many issues with revenue. And so just to remind you, in 2011, the General Assembly, in their wisdom, in the height of the recession, passed a temporary income tax increase, taking personal income taxes to a rate of 5%. That legislation, when it passed in 2011, had an expiration date. That's what we mean when we say a sunset. It expired on January 1st of this year, of 2015. And so, unfortunately, we went back down to a 3.75% tax because the General Assembly last session, this time last year, did not pass an extension or make permanent that income tax rate of 5%, nor did they address the issue in our veto session in the fall. Folks remember we have a 2-week veto session in the fall that happened after our election in November, and the governor-elect, Governor Rauner, at that time asked the General Assembly to not pass a revenue bill, knowing that the administration was going to change, that Governor Quinn had lost, and that he was coming into office in January, that he asked the General Assembly to not take action before he took office, and that this would be something that would be addressed once he was the sitting governor. The General Assembly did that, and so no action was taken in November on the revenue crisis. So that brought us to January 1st, where that tax expired. So what that meant was the General Assembly last year, when they dismissed or adjourned on May 31st, they knew that they were passing a budget that had some one-time fixes, but ultimately that the majority of programs in state government were not fully funded for a 12-month year, that in fact many of them would need sometimes significant additional resources to make it through an entire fiscal year. The assumption was that they would be coming back in November and passing revenue, and so that's where the resources were going to come from. So yes, they passed basically for all intents and purposes an unbalanced budget, but they did have a strategy and a plan in terms of how to balance it before programs actually ran out of money. The election did not go as the majority of the General Assembly had planned, nor how Governor Quinn, that previous Governor Quinn, thought it would. And so what that left us was with a FY15 budget was about a $2 billion hole. That's a hole before we even start to account for the lost revenue that we have from the diminishing tax rate. So the FY15 budget began the year about $2 billion lower than what was needed because of the situation I just explained to you. In addition, as many of you remember, we passed the income tax increase in 2011 because our state economy and the country was in a recession. We had significant liability issues in terms of unpaid bills going into that recession, and really that recession ended up being a perfect storm for Illinois. We had unpaid bills, as a backlog of unpaid bills at that time. We also had an underfunded pension liability, meaning that we had, as a state, the General Assembly had opted to skip the state's pension payments for a number of years. And so just to remind folks, the pension fund is kind of a cost sharing, much like a co-payment is for child care. There's a payment that's put in by the state, and there's a payment that's put in by the parent. With a pension fund, employees of the state who are part of the state's pension fund pay their part of their pension, right? They have it taken out of their paycheck and it goes into the pension fund. The state, at the same time, is supposed to be putting in an agreed-upon amount into a state fund in order to shore up that account and make sure that when people need to pull their pension, when they retire, that the money's actually in the bank. Unfortunately, what the state has done for more years than I would like to account is that the state has skipped their pension obligation payment, and so the state's obligation was not being met, thus the fund is underfunded significantly. And so we still have the title of the country's most or worst unfunded liability as it relates to our pension system in the country. So that's kind of just a recap on the revenue situation and how that took us into the January legislative session that began the middle of January, really didn't get kicked off until February. Given the new General Assembly and the new governor, it took a little time to kind of ramp things up. We're actually still in a ramp-up mode, I feel. So closer to home, many of you have had lots of bad dreams, but have tried to forget that the child care crisis was right in the middle of that revenue mess. So we started hearing very early on. We knew going into the fiscal year that child care was underfunded. That underfunding amount kind of quadrupled or tripled to be about $300 million at the start of the calendar year. $300 million is a significant amount of money when what you'll see later is child care is funded with general revenue fund dollars at close to 500, but so 300 million is a big chunk of change. There are a couple of reasons why that underfunded amount got so big. One, we knew that child care was underfunded coming into this fiscal year because of the situation I explained to you, because they assumed they were going to address the revenue situation in the veto session, and they would then do supplemental appropriations across the board for those programs that they knew were short of money. So that was one thing. We knew that going into it. The amount was, I would say, in the light of where we are today, manageable at 84 million, or an estimated 84 million. The additional thing that started happening was that we saw an increased caseload, particularly of infants and toddlers, going into center-based child care programs from Family Friend and Neighbor. That's really good news. Our state has a very high-quality goal in terms of getting the hardest to reach, highest need children into the highest quality care. This is something that we have been working towards, but what happened is we saw kind of an increase in the percentage of children that were moving from Family Friend and Neighbor care into center-based care, and what that means from a budget perspective is they go from the cheapest form of care to the most expensive form of care. And so that was creating additional pressures on our appropriation line, on our budget. And then finally, the kind of unforeseen gorilla that has pounded us for the last 18 months or so is the child care management system. The CCMS system was implemented January 1st, 2014. It went wrong pretty much from the get-go in terms of not working correctly, having lots of kind of what they call bugs in the computer technology world. And what ended up happening was that families were not being qualified in good time, providers were not being paid in good time. Much of the processing that happens at a resource and referral agency had to be done manually because the system was not working. And so as a result of that backlog and the pressures that were being felt by the department and the individuals working at each resource and referral across the state, was that the department chose to make a kind of a short-term solution to what they hoped would be a short-term crisis with the CCMS, which was to go to presumptive eligibility. So that meant that for 3 different cycles of 6-month cycles. What that meant was that, actually they weren't all 6-month cycles, but three different times over the course of a year, the department said if a family is in the child care assistance program, you can presumptively assume that they still are eligible, and so you can kind of skip the redetermination paperwork and just redetermine them eligible, and let's just keep going. All new applicants would have to go through the full application process and the determination process, but anybody that was in the child care assistance program got to stay in the child care assistance program without going through all of their work activity, checking their current pay stubs, etc. What that meant was that our caseload skyrocketed, because what we know is the reality of low-income working families in this state and across the country is that their lives are very unstable, and so they cycle in and out of work activity, and so they very oftentimes will cycle in and out of the child care assistance program. They're eligible for a period, they're ineligible because they stopped working, their education and training program ended, whatever it might be. And so that cycling is always built into how we budget. But because they stayed in, plus new people were coming in all the time, what that meant was a significant increase in our caseload very unexpectedly. Those really 3 things came together that created that $300 million amount, which was significant and pretty overwhelming for all of you, all of us, and for the General Assembly. And what it led to was a kind of, basically the child care program ran out of money. And you all remember that. And what that meant was that payments were not being made to providers. What that meant for many providers who did not have any flexibility or cushion, which is the majority, many programs closed, many programs reduced their hours, many programs, you know, no longer accepted child care assistance program children because they were never assured that there was any way to pay for those children. And so it was a crisis kind of up and down, back and forward. And so what that did was create, and we're still seeing the effects of that today, an incredible awareness in the General Assembly of the role that child care plays in low-income families' lives and in our state's economy. We had the most amazing series of organic organizing I have seen in my 15 years here. And we did some pretty darn good work here at Illinois Action for Children in terms of organizing, getting in front of the media, working with the House and Senate Democratic majorities in order to help staff and legislators really understand what was happening, really understand the impact that it was having in communities, and really become the most vocal advocates for child care in a bipartisan way. I will say we had Republicans and Democrats alike in every hearing asking questions, understanding the ramifications on working families' lives and on the larger child care infrastructure. And everybody was advocating for a solution to the funding crisis so that child care and also early intervention could, those crises could be addressed. So it took longer than I think anybody had hoped, but we were able to finally find a solution just before the legislature broke for Easter and Passover in late March, early April. And so the General Assembly passed House Bills 317 and 318, which really did appropriate the dollars, the supplemental appropriation that was needed in order to get the money flowing back into the child care assistance program. The supplemental appropriation that ultimately passed in those 2 vehicles the dollars came from a couple of places. $1.3 billion came from fund sweeps. So our state's budget is made up of significant agency budgets, right? Lines for child welfare, lines for child care, lines for juvenile justice, but there are also scattered throughout the entire budget hundreds of special funds that have been created over many years. Many of them exist for very specific purposes, very legitimate purposes, different taxes or different fees. So a hospital assessment fee, there's a fee on beds. So different things like that, those dollars go not into the general revenue fund, but they go into special funds. And so a significant number of those funds were swept if they had existing balances in them that were not obligated. And so there was about $1.3 billion that was generated through across-the-board fund sweeps. $300 million came from across the board 2.25% cut to most grant programs. What that meant was that so for childcare, yes, you were getting a supplemental, but that supplemental was not the full amount that we had asked for. That supplemental was minus 2.25% because everything was being cut across the board. So that's where the challenge with the supplemental was not that there wasn't bipartisan support for it. The challenge became, where does the money come from? Because you can only pass a supplemental appropriation if there's money in the bank to pay for it. And so they had to identify the revenue sources that would basically float the check that had to be written to pay for the number of programs that were running out of money. So what we've done here is, in this slide, is to just go over the early care and education programs that were included in the supplemental and how much they actually got. And so first and foremost was the child care. That was the big ticket item. And that was so that is now funded at, or was funded after the supplemental at $494 million. So child care alone received a $266 million increase as part of the supplemental appropriation. Those are big bucks. Early intervention was down about $12 million. It needed about a $12 million supplemental, so that brought the early intervention program to $85 million. The early childhood block grant went the other direction. Because everything was subject to a 2.25% across the board cut, the early childhood block grant, as a result of the supplemental, lost dollars. It lost approximately $7 million. Our budget line at the end of last year, so at the beginning of FY15, was $300 million. So because of the supplemental and everybody needed to get cut in order to put a little bit of money into the kitty, early childhood block grant also suffered along with that in the tune of $7 million. Bilingual education as well lost about $1.5 million, so that brought that total appropriation to $62 million. So two programs were kind of saved with the supplemental. Two of the programs we care about and work with were actually less off or worse off because of the supplemental appropriation. Next slide. So that seems like a long time ago. That was so much energy and so much effort and so much coordination across the early learning system, all of the folks across the state and organizations that work on these issues. But we wanted to recap 15, the kind of fight for 15, so to speak, not the minimum wage, which is also called the fight for 15, I think, but really the FY15 supplemental, which took up the first part of our legislative session this year. And we're going to stop now, and Samir, if there's any questions that have come in, why don't you read those out, and we'll try and answer those as best we can in terms of clarity, or if folks just want a little bit more information, we will try and answer those.
Yeah, so we don't have questions. We have, oh, here we go. We're getting a couple in now. Please submit your questions through the question box on your dashboard. The first question is, so where do we stand with CCMS at this moment?
It's a good question. So Deloitte, who is the consulting firm that was on site for a number of years to develop CCMS, are actually back on site. So they've been brought back in to do some additional fixes. I'm not an expert on CCMS, so I'll tell you what I think I know. So actually they just implemented a fix on Friday that didn't go so well, so it caused some delays. For all intents and purposes, CCMS is working. It is never going to be the elimination of paper that I think was originally idealized when we set out to create the CCMS system. I don't think that it's going to lead to the incredible efficiencies that we had hoped, but it is working. It is the state system, and processing is happening in relatively the amount of time that it should be. So there are not significant delays in terms of backlogs of unpaid providers or unprocessed applications for care. So as of right now, and again, I'm not the expert. I don't work on that side of the organization, but my understanding, based on updates that I got from the leadership and across the state, is that it's working, but it's still got some bugs to work out. So Deloitte is still on site, and some of those fixes, so to speak, don't go as smoothly as they would hope. But it's a work in progress. I hope that's helpful to some degree.
Yes, and then one more question here about FY15. Will the extra funds received for child care assistance in FY15 cover the rest of this fiscal year?
Yes. The challenge with state budgets and caseloads and cost per child is that it is an ever-changing target. And so when we started out needing a supplemental, we needed $300 million. That amount had actually reduced by the time a supplemental was actually passed. But then we still got a 2.25 reduction off of that amount. But given the fact that the presumptive eligibility period is ending, and has been in this last quarter, a number of folks are kind of automatically coming off the program. So caseloads have somewhat stabilized. So my understanding is, to this date on June 8th, is that there won't be any kind of quote unquote running out of money for the current fiscal year. The problem Samir is going to talk to you about the next big problem, which is the FY16. So for all intents and purposes, we are fully funded for FY15.
All right, thank you. We do have a couple more questions, but they are mostly. Oh wait, here one just came in. Will payments for June come in July? I think this is a good question about how the funding works and when providers get paid. Yeah,
so the way that, you always get paid in arrears, and so June payments are always made in July. So just like anything that we're paying out now is paying for services rendered in May. So services that are being provided in June are paid out in July, but they're still being paid out with FY15 dollars. So they're not relying. I mean, some years we have pushed liability, so we use the next year's money to pay last year's bills. I don't foresee that happening. So any services that are provided in June are still FY15, and they will be paid out with the FY15 funds in July. So yes.
Yes, so there is appropriation to pay for June services. All right, so the bulk of the questions left are for FY16, so I will just move on and we can answer some of them coming up going forward. So hi, my name is Samir Tanna. I'm Assistant Director of Public Policy here at Illinois Action for Children. And I'm going to talk about the governor's proposed FY16 budget. What is the status of the budget that the General Assembly has passed for FY16 and the need for new revenue. So to get started, kind of parallel to how to when the fight for the FY15 supplemental was going on, the governor proposed his FY16 budget, which is a fiscal year that begins July 1st. He proposed this on February 18th. And this was his first proposed budget. Governors are required by law to have a proposed budget and a budget address in February, and he stuck to his legal obligation and released his budget. So to go over the governor's proposal, he proposed $2.2 billion in pension savings and another $700 million in group health cuts for a total of $2.9 billion in cuts. He proposed a reduction in revenue sharing to local governments of $1.3 billion. The state from a portion of the tax proceeds it receives, the state gives a proportional dollar amount back to municipalities and local governments. The governor proposed cutting that sharing in half, saving or cutting $1.3 billion in spending. The governor also proposed $1.5 billion in Medicaid cuts. And then just to round everything out, he proposed about $900 million in cuts to discretionary programs in DHS, DCFS, public health, et cetera. So the total amount of cuts that the governor proposed was $6.6 billion. This is widely assumed or known to be the revenue deficit needed to fund programs at current levels for FY16. So he took that loss in revenue and cut everywhere in the budget. This budget does not assume any new revenue and assumes the current tax rate of 3.75%, or the current income tax rate of 3.75% to continue going forward. For child care, the governor proposed, as many of you heard, cuts to child care. So based on the end of year budget, the governor's proposed a $156 million cut to child care to a general revenue level of $338 million. In his proposal, he proposed freezing intake for all children over the age of 5, so essentially eliminating after school and out of school time for children, so not just the couple hours after school for children, but also children whose parents work non-traditional hours, overnights, second shift, and early first shifts. Children over the age of 5 would lose child care for those times as well. The governor proposed an increase of parent copays to FY14 levels. He also proposed the elimination of relative care, so license-exempt care for families who, again, choose to have a relative care for them based on cultural reasons or because they work overnight shifts where they would parents would more trust a relative to care for their child overnight. This line of care would be eliminated in the governor's proposed budget. Additionally, he proposed a $23 million cut to the early intervention budget, so that line would go down to $63 million. So he would reduce the eligibility, I'm sorry, there's a typo on here, from a 30% delay to a 50% delay. So that would essentially be eliminating half of the children on the program. Currently, there are 21,000 children on that receive early intervention services. About 10,000 of them experience delays between the 30% marker and the 50% marker. Over time, those children would be eliminated from the program, so cutting the program in half. That is obviously also a catastrophic proposed change to early childhood services. So in some, you could call good news, the governor proposed a $340 million increase to the P through 12 education budget through the Illinois State Board of Education. He proposed a $25 million restoration for the Early Childhood Block Grant. The Early Childhood Block Grant supports the programs of prevention initiatives, a birth to 3 education program, kindergarten readiness programming, and preschool for all, the 3 to 5 kindergarten readiness program. If you recall, we call this a $25 million restoration because over the last 6 years, the Early Childhood Block Grant has been cut by a total of $80 million, reducing services for over 20,000 children. $25 million is a step in the right direction. However, it does not fully restore the cuts that have been realized over the recession. The governor also proposed a $290 million increase to general state aid. This is the foundation level funding for many school districts. Again, this is a per student distribution, and many of the school districts in the lower income areas really do depend on general state aid funding. A $290 million increase brings the proration level. So there's a foundation level for schools that's around $5,900 a student. Right now, the state pays about 89% of that dollar amount. With this $290 million increase, the local school districts would receive about 95% of the proration, which again is good for those, is extremely good for those districts in low income and low property value areas. In this budget, the governor proposed flat funding for bilingual education. Other proposed cuts, the governor proposed the elimination of a slew of services, including Teen Reach, homeless prevention services, some epilepsy grants, really devastating cuts to programs that vulnerable families rely on. He also proposed a $147 million cut to the Department of Children and Family Services. Again, this could very much negatively impact child care licensing. One proposal that was pretty disturbing was the elimination of services for children who are wards of the state once they turn 18. Currently, services are provided for children between 18 and 21 years old. The governor proposed cutting services to those children. The governor also proposed a 31% cut to higher education, which could really devastate our public education system in this state. So just, looking at the governor's budget as a whole, he proposes $6.6 billion in cuts. However, we know that the $2.9 billion of proposed pension cuts are going to be impossible to achieve beginning July 1st. History shows us that any pension reform plan, like the one passed a year and a half ago, any pension reform plan would have to go through a court challenge and up to the Illinois Supreme Court. The last challenge we just found out at the beginning of this month did not pass constitutional muster, so there are no savings this year in the pension costs going forward. So any plan agreed to by the General Assembly could not take effect in the next fiscal year, and arguably wouldn't even be able to bank the savings in FY17. So it's a pipe dream to have any of those savings included in the governor's budget. And we also know that a cuts-only approach is bad. It will have a lasting effect on children and families. It will have a lasting effect on the infrastructure of the state and the programs. In the state. Sorry, it looks like there's a fire nearby. So again, as we all know, cuts and cuts only are not going to solve this problem, and it's unfortunate that the governor proposed a budget that did not have any revenue increases included in it. So what's going on with the budget? So after about 3 months of hemming and hawing and going back and forth and negotiating between the governor and the General Assembly, the House and Senate Democrats decided to go it alone on their FY16 budget. So before the deadline of May 31st, the House and Senate Democrats passed their budget for FY16. For the most part, the budget annualizes a 2.25% cut for most grant programs, as well as many personnel lines. There was zero Republican support for this budget as it passed through the General Assembly. And right now, these budgets are being held by the Democratic leaders. They are afraid to send these budgets to the governor because they fear he will veto them outright. So they are holding the budgets, hoping to negotiate with the governor on these budgets. So, as many of you know, the budget is about $3 to $4 billion out of balance, which means that to properly fund this budget, similarly to last year's budget, there needs to be more revenue. The General Assembly they understand that fact, and they're using this budget to negotiate with the governor on hopefully getting some revenue to meet the Democratic priorities. So here is what the budget looks like for early childhood. Just again, the Democrats passed this budget because they believe these are the levels that government should be funded at. They want to draw a line in the sand to say this. We don't believe government should be funded at much lower levels than this. The governor has resigned to the fact that he probably needs to fund government a little bit higher than it is now, but he has some other budgetary concerns or non-budgetary concerns that we'll discuss in a second. So for early childhood, child care was funded in the Democrats' budget at $480 million. That is approximately a $15 million decrease to the end of year funding that we saw earlier, $494 million. That is about, again, a 2.25% cut. Early intervention is funded at $82.5 million, again, with about a 2.25% cut. Bilingual education is flat at $63 million. The early childhood block grant is funded at $318 million, again, with a 2.25% cut. Teen Reach is fully funded at $13.8 million. And the home visiting programs did receive a 2.25% cut, Parents Too Soon and Healthy Families Illinois, total combined funding of $16.5 million. To note there is a federal maintenance of effort on that programming. Illinois has received over $20 million for home visiting programs with the hope that we would maintain our current funding levels. So we'll have to see how that gets sorted out going forward. Again, you see here for most programs a 2.25% cut is annualized in, and these are definitely priority areas for the General Assembly to keep funded at these levels. So we'll see how that goes forward. For the State Board of Education, as compared to the governor's budget, the Democrats passed an education budget with a $265 million increase to the State Board of Education. Again, that's the $25.3 million increase for the early childhood block grant. Bilingual education did essentially get restored to the pre-supplemental levels. And the general state aid in this budget was increased by $250 million. Now, again, that is short of what the governor had proposed. However, what the Democrats did here was they built in some progressivity to it so that those districts that have the lowest tax base and have the least amount of money and the ability to tax will actually be able to get more funding under the Democrats' budget. So they could actually get up to that 95% proration level that the governor had proposed. However, other districts will be held to a 92% proration. Again, that is still a big increase over last year's funding. And then finally, on the budget, the Democrats did introduce only a $15 million cut to DCFS, again, mostly to the personnel line. So as you can see, this budget, while again out of balance and not fully funding many of the programs that we care about, it still is a much better budget than what the governor had proposed, and much better for children and families than what the governor had proposed. In this budget, they do not take savings or cuts from DHS and DCFS and other important programs for children and increase education. There is an attempt here to make sure that the whole family is covered through the funding levels in this budget.
Awesome.
Right.
No, but we got through it.
It's not. So yeah, I'm going to turn this back over to Ceci. Actually, wait. There was a couple things I did want to go through. Sorry, everybody. So there's some key dates here in the FY16 budget. July 1st, again, is the beginning of the FY16 fiscal year. So any budget or any spending that happens after July 1st for programs after July 1st, there needs to be a budget in place that day. So that is the first key date. The second key date is July 15th. I believe that is a Wednesday. That is the first payroll for state employees. that in years past has been a very important date because, again, those who work for the state do not want to work for free. So meeting payroll is extremely important, and without a budget, meeting payroll is nearly impossible. And then August 20th, this is a new date. I don't know that many people have discussed this date before. However, this is the day that payments go out to school districts. So this could be an important date in the negotiations. Both sides, the governor and the General Assembly, may not want payment delays to school districts as they open. So that is another date to watch out for going forward. And as I mentioned before, agencies cannot obligate funds they do not have and that have not been appropriated. So there's no guarantee that services provided after July 1st will be reimbursed. We are not obviously encouraging anybody to not provide services, but going forward, it's, it may be similar to the fight we had in FY15 without knowing when the money's coming. There could be some issues going forward. So just wanted to make you all aware of that. And then finally, revenue. As I mentioned before, this budget is not complete. It is an incomplete budget, similar to FY15, as Ceci explained. There needs to be a companion revenue package to make this budget complete. And as I mentioned before, the budget is somewhere between $3 and $4 billion out of balance. So there needs to be revenue to match that amount of money, and that is what needs to be discussed and negotiated among the leaders and the governor. The governor does have a position. He has a few ideas on his turnaround agenda that he would like passed before any revenue is passed. Again, those are non-budgetary items. We do not take any kind of stance on those issues. We need a budget that is good for families, and we need revenue to pay for it. So just to give you a little taste here, I will post a fact sheet on the revenue options that have been floated. But there has been no action taken on any revenue items, but I did want to just state a few out there just so you know that there are solutions that you can advocate for, and we will get them out to everybody going forward. So one idea, which is the easiest idea and what we had before, is to increase the income tax back up towards that 5% level. So for every 0.25% increase in the income tax, the state would receive about $1 billion. So if we were to raise our income tax by 1%, so up to 4.75%, not even back up to the 5% level, the state would receive about $4 billion for that. So that could arguably plug our hole right there. A corporate tax, income tax restoration to the previous level could bring us somewhere between $330 million and $770 million. A sugar-sweetened beverage tax, which Illinois Action for Children supports, would bring in about $600 million. If you use about $500 million of that for Medicaid, you get a 1-to-1 federal match, which would then bring that revenue up to $1 billion. And another idea that's been floated is to broaden our sales taxes to services. So right now, if you go and you buy diapers or water or groceries, there's an income tax. But if you purchase, if you go to the nail salon and you get a manicure, you get a massage or a haircut or something like that, there is no sales tax on those items. If we were to expand our sales tax to services and use Iowa's model, we could, and at our current sales tax rate, we could receive about $4.6 billion in new revenue. So there are options out there. We don't have to use one. There's no one magic bullet, but there are ways to combine a few of these so that the pain is spread out, but families and children are still receiving vital services from the state. So on that note, I'm going to pass it back over to Ceci Nyman, who's going to talk about this new round of proposed cuts that the governor proposed on June 2nd, just less than a week ago. and she will walk you through that and what we're doing on that front. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Samir. And it just seems like we just can't catch a break. So as we now know, we did not finish the the session on time. We do not have, or we did, but we don't have a budget. And then on June 2nd, last Tuesday, the governor at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon released a press release that basically made significant cuts across the board to numerous programs, including child care, including juvenile justice, including programs for the aging, Teen Reach, and a number of other things. And you can go to the governor's website and see that press release along with all of his other releases. But what happened with what he is proposing for child care is very similar to what he proposed in his proposed budget, which, you know, the General Assembly, for all intents and purposes, rejected because they never moved it. Even though it was never introduced in the form of a bill, it was always just his proposed budget. The only budget bills that actually moved were those that the House Democrats and Senate Democrats moved and passed. So what he proposed, even though there was very little detail in the press release, what we understand is included in that proposal is the proposed increase in copayments. So that would go back to the July 2013 copay scale before the 3 decreases went into effect over an 18-month period. That was done by executive order of the governor. I will say that is a, you know, while it is an increase for low-income families in terms of what they pay, that copayment chart was designed with great care and intention through a work group drawn from the Child Care Advisory Group a number of years ago. Myself and Dan Lesser co-chaired that group with Linda Satterfield. So it could have been a lot worse in terms of he could have gone to a pre-ARA copay scale, which was where families truly were paying up to 15% of a family's income. This copay scale caps at 10%, and in fact, nobody is actually paying as much as 10% of their family's income. So while it is an increase for low-income families and will create hardship, I will say on this one, it could have been worse. The next one, not so much. So what's stopping intake for new families and create a waiting list? As many of you know, Illinois is one of the very few states that has never had a waiting list for child care services since welfare reform, since really child care in its current iteration has existed in states with the block grant. The way that what this would mean is that families who are in the Child Care Assistance Program could stay in the Child Care Assistance Program. If for some reason they lapse for more than a 30-day period, they would be considered new, and they would then be placed on a waiting list. What this is designed to do is to bring our caseload down, which is the largest driver of the child care budget in terms of its cost, is the number of kids that are cared for. So what this is intended to do is to basically eliminate about 20,000 children from the Child Care Assistance Program, because there is an estimated cost associated with every child. And so the department has been given an appropriation number that we have not been given, but our understanding is that they need to basically eliminate about 20,000 kids from the program in order to live within the appropriation that they're being given. Even though we don't have a budget, that is the target goal. And so the administration has said that the way that they're going to start to get to that number is to basically stop the pipeline of kids that are coming into the program. The federal requirements prioritize 4 populations of children. They are children in high poverty, so those are 50% or below of the poverty level, teen parents, TANF recipients, and children with special needs. So those 4 priority populations must be served, but all other children will be placed on a waiting list if they're new to the program or have been out of the program longer than 30 days. This is a significant change. It is unclear how this will be administered, given that there are R&Rs, there are contracted programs. Nothing is kind of regional, or everything is kind of regionally managed, except for the contracts. And so, you know, somebody coming in Belleville and leaving in Cook, what does that mean and how does that get managed? But it is just about the numbers of kids. And so we know, the way we understand it is they're trying to eliminate about 20,000 children from the caseload. So that's a big change and a big cut and a big, if implemented, will be a huge change for all of us. The final one is requiring background checks for relative providers. So as you'll remember from the governor's proposed budget, he had in fact proposed to eliminate relative care from our child care assistance program. Our understanding is that the federal government did not look nicely on that proposal, that it really felt like it was not living within the letter of the federal block grant law. And so they had to retreat from that original proposal. And what this is, as many of you will remember, back in 2004, 2005, we implemented a registry for family, friend, and neighbor providers, and we have background checks for non-relative caregivers who are family, friend, and neighbor providers. What this does is expand background checks for those caregivers who are related to the child, who are currently exempt. And the sense here is that this will also serve to drive down the caseload because of the stringency of background checks. So there are a number of providers out there that might not pass. Might not submit to taking the background check in the first place. They're opposed to it. They don't want to subject to it. They don't want to, and so they will simply opt out, or that there are a number of providers out there that will not pass the background check. It is quite stringent. And so, again, this will drive caseloads down. The sense from folks at the department is that because they are related to the child, that these children will continue to be cared for, even though they're not part of the child care assistance program. There's absolutely no data or research that really confirms that. There is a sense that because they're related, that they work out another arrangement. So again, this was proposed in a press release on June 2nd. There is very little detail that's been attached. I do know that the Department of Human Services did a call with resource and referral agencies, and maybe I'm not sure if contracted programs were on. I believe contracted programs were on there as well, to start to kind of go over some of this detail. And so there's not much more that we know right now, but we've told you what we do know. So so again, you know, there is no budget. The General Assembly did not see this coming. As I understand it, many state agency directors did not know that this was coming at 4 o'clock on June 2nd as a press release, that they had been going through multiple budget scenarios, and the governor's office simply took the best and the brightest in his view and put them together to be a package that was then released in the press release. So, so the legislature has been called into special session. That was made clear before they adjourned on May 31st. The House was in last Thursday. The Senate was scheduled for the first time for tomorrow. The House is now added tomorrow. They are, you know, the big issue at the end of the session, and continues to be, is the governor's turnaround agenda, that he very much wants to deal with other issues before he is willing to deal with the budget. And so the special session to date has not addressed budgetary issues. They're dealing with some other issues, and not even necessarily the turnaround. Our understanding is that they're going into a committee of the whole, meaning that the whole legislature meets together tomorrow. So we're unclear of the topic, so it doesn't seem like they're, again, getting down to budget business. We will stay on top of this as best as we can. We want to communicate with you frequently. We need to pace ourselves. This could potentially be a very long summer. I think that media is going to, once again, just like it was in the supplemental battles, really end up playing a significant role in our advocacy work, because as we draw closer to July 1st, the realities of running businesses without contracts or without assurances of payment for services rendered is going to take a significant toll on how businesses are run post July 1st. I understand that. This is new territory for many of us. And so we definitely want to hear from you, and we will be sharing the information that we have and that we get with all of you as well. So, sorry, I just have to move a box here so I can see. Yeah, so that's kind of where we are right now. I want to draw your attention also that we do have some FaceTime available in terms of, we have our State Public Policy Caucus. This is, as many of you remember, we have gone more to a regional structure, but the one that our members voted that they wanted to have as a statewide caucus was the June one, so that we could always debrief on the budget and the session as a whole. We will be gathering on June 23rd in Peoria. So we are moving the location. Usually this has been one that's been in Bloomington. We decided to mix it up a little bit and go to Peoria, and that will be on June 23rd. We will be recapping the session in more depth in terms of also pieces of legislation that came and went, as well as giving you an up-to-date scenario of where we are on budget. Maybe by that time we'll have a budget. I'm not probably very optimistic about that, but you never know. I've been proven wrong many, many times. So please join us in Peoria on June 23rd, and you can register at our website, and it is very helpful to know if you're coming so we can plan accordingly. So we will be doing state updates. We will be doing an in-depth federal update. Lots of things happening at the federal level in terms of both CCDBG and thinking about the implementation of that reauthorization at the state level. So we'll have a panel discussion on that with lots of discussion, as well as diving deeply into the ESEA in terms of its impact and possibility it provides for early childhood education. So please do plan on joining us, and always you should like us when you see us, but if you don't see us, then you should like us on Facebook and Twitter, which, yeah, you should do that. So we do have a number of questions. First and foremost, let me say this PowerPoint will in fact be on our website. So yes, you can access this website. I mean, the PowerPoint probably as early as tomorrow or later this week. I'm not sure it's going to get up today, but it'll be up later this week. So please feel free to go to our website and know that it's getting a revamp, so it will have a different look and more usability in the fall. But for now, you should be able to find what you need. We also have a question about Accelerate program. It's a good question. So there are not specific line items for Accelerate. Those are programs or initiatives within the child care budget that they help us meet our quality mandates for the federal government. There's also a number of things with Accelerate that are paid for through our Race to the Top grant. So there are some things that are not affected as it relates to Accelerate because of the budget, but I will say that when a budget shakes out, the department will need to assess, where money comes from across the board. So I can't answer the question definitively, but to say that yes, it is part of the child care services line that relies on general revenue funds. If the child care budget is significantly reduced through cuts, then I suspect that we will feel that in multiple places. In addition to the proposed cuts that impact children and families, we will start to feel those impacts in the system, in our infrastructure of care, meaning resource referral agencies, meaning some of our quality initiatives. And so, but there has not been any specific conversation about that. But again, that's something that we will track and definitely advocate when we have a budget to make sure that cuts happen in the least painful ways as much as we are able. It is not true that the Child Care Assistance Program is ending on July 1st. Hopefully, whoever asked that question has had that answered. What's happening on July 1st, based on the governor's most recent press release, is that some changes will be taking place July 1st to start to, what they would argue, manage the program within the appropriation. But the Child Care Assistance Program is not going away. It is simply right now under threat, and that's why we need you to be strong advocates and vocal advocates, but be very clear the Child Care Assistance Program is not ending. Somebody wrote in about being behind in vouchers. I'm not really sure about that. So I can't answer that because those are very specific to cases and regions, and so it's a CCMS question, and I'm afraid I would have you go to the department to answer those questions. Because I would say that if services are rendered in 15, even if there's a delay, that those services should be paid for because those services are rendered in 15. Just because the calendar calendar turns over to July 1st, doesn't mean that FY15 appropriations goes away. We know July pays for June services, so I don't think that that's the worry. I can't speak to the delay in terms of whether that's CCMS related or otherwise. So will extra funds received for child care assistance FY15 cover the rest of this fiscal year? We answered that question. Our understanding is yes, that we do not have a shortfall for FY15. We already talked about Accelerate.
Okay, hello everybody. It's already 2 o'clock.
Yep.
I think Ceci, just the last question I think you should answer. There's still confusion about school-age kids over the summer. So I think you should answer that and then talk about the waiting list and the priority populations just one more time. And then everybody, you have our contact information. Please send any other questions you have, and this PowerPoint will be up online along with any other supporting materials that we have.
So the governor proposed back in February to eliminate the Child Care Assistance Program for children over the age of 6. That is no longer on the table as far as we understand it. It was not included in the governor's press release. It was not entertained at all by the General Assembly. So while that was a proposal back in February, that has not gone into effect and as far as I can see is a dead proposal. I will also say, as I mentioned, for the elimination of relative care providers from our system, that was not looked upon nicely by the feds. This is also one that was questionable whether the state actually had the authority to kind of start picking and choosing which kids they served based on age. So that is not in the mix right now as far as we can see. We have not heard any conversation about that, and we have very strong bipartisan support in both chambers that is a non-starter in terms of a policy change. So I would say that I do not anticipate changes or any disruption of services specifically for school-age children or summer care, other than the fact that the whole system is somewhat under threat, and it's all a bit of a big question mark. Again, real quickly, the waiting list is based on the press release last Tuesday, will go into effect July 1st, along with an increase in parent co-pays, along with a implementation of a system that will require background checks for relative care providers. The waiting list specifically is something very new to Illinois. We have not had that ever in Illinois since we've had the Child Care and Development Block Grant as our funding source since 1996. It's unclear to me how that gets administered because that is the Department of Human Services, but what that means is that no new applicants will be accepted into the Child Care Assistance Program. Children and families who are currently enrolled can stay enrolled, and they would need to go through their redetermination, and as long as they are still eligible under the state's guidelines, they would be redetermined and they would stay in uninterrupted. However, if somebody in the Child Care Assistance Program who is in right now lapses for 30 days or more, they are then considered a new applicant, and they would go in line with everybody else in terms of getting a child care assistance slot. There are many other states that have waiting lists, I'm afraid. Illinois has always been able to avoid that, but the administration and what they have proposed has deemed that this is the way that they will control the population of kids that are in child care to bring the revenue liability down to a point where they feel is manageable and acceptable, and so that is what they have proposed. So again, it's not completely crystal clear to me how that is going to be managed by the Department of Human Services because they're going to have to think of a way to do it because they've never done it before. And we have a long time between now and June 30th, so I would hope that we can make some progress and can avoid that ultimate reality, but the department I know right now is planning towards that, and we have to advocate against that, and that means that we advocate for revenue, that means that we make our voices heard, and that we stay on message whenever we get in front of a camera or a parent or somebody in your church. So with that, I think we are going to try and wrap it up, and I hope that provides some clarity. I realize I was reading questions really long. Yes, so July 1st is the first big date. Well, next time you'll see us, hopefully, in person is June 23rd at our caucus. July 1st is the beginning of a new fiscal year. That is the date to watch for in terms of things going into effect that's been proposed by the governor. The next big date is July 15th. That is when state employees will start to miss payroll after that, because that's when new money needs to start paying for new bills, right? So up until July 15th, you're still using FY15 dollars to pay for FY15 bills. Once you're 2 weeks into July, that means you're well into your new fiscal year, and you need fiscal year funds to pay for fiscal year bills. If we don't have a budget by July 1st, that's not possible. So that's the other big date. But July 1st is when the state will presumably, unless something changes between now and then, go to a waiting list for child care, meaning new cases will be put on that waiting list. They will not receive services immediately. So I think we have to end. We're about 10 minutes over, and I thank you all for dialing in. And we have over 115 people about on this call. So we've got some good questions, and if there are any that we feel like we didn't answer in some way, shape, or form, we can post those on the website, or in some way Maya can get those out. But I think we managed to hit all the hot spots. We had a lot of duplications, but we hope to see you on June 23rd. Please make a point of visiting our website, taking action when we send out an alert, and if there's action to be taken, and then we'll try and keep you as well informed on updates and information as we possibly can. So thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon.